My daughter spent 2 weeks building a science project for her group. I paid $400 for supplies. Then they took credit and left her off the presentation team. She sat in the audience until one judge asked, "Who actually built this?" You should have seen their faces. This all started a few months ago when my daughter Rena, who's 13, got assigned to a group project for her school's science fair. She's always been a focused, quiet kid. The kind that gets overlooked in a loud classroom, but who's absolutely brilliant when you give her the space. She's always had a mind that works in layers, constantly pulling things apart, analyzing, rebuilding them. I remember once finding her dismantling an old humidifier in the garage just because she was curious about the motor's rhythm. We live outside of Sacramento in a quiet, predictable neighborhood. I've been raising Rena alone since the divorce. Her dad lives in San Jose now, sees her twice a month, and contributes when it's convenient. He's not a bad person, just distant. So, day to day, it's just been me and her, and maybe that's made us closer than some mothers and daughters. The science fair at Maple Ridge Middle School is a big deal. It's competitive. There are real judges, engineers, university professors, even a few tech folks from nearby companies. The winning team usually gets their picture in the local paper and a donation for the school's STEM program. But more than that, it's a way for the kids to feel seen for something besides sports or popularity. Rena was placed in a group with Mira, Dylan, and Sophia, kids with reputations for being academic stars. I'll admit, I was a little relieved. I thought maybe being around more outgoing kids might pull her out of her shell a bit. And for the first few days, she seemed excited. The group decided on a complicated but fascinating project, a climate-controlled mini-ecosystem that simulated changes in weather conditions and their effects on plant life. Rena came home bubbling over with ideas, diagrams, charts. She showed me the designs she'd drawn on graph paper, how she'd calculated the required temperature differentials, where to install the sensors, how to ensure the water cycle replicated naturally. She was doing actual environmental engineering, at 13. And when I asked about the others in her group, she said they were busy but gave her ideas now and then. I didn't think much of it. Not at first. She liked working alone. She thrived in it. I drove her to hardware stores, craft shops, even a specialty science supply warehouse in Midtown. I ordered supplies online. The final cost was just over $400. It wasn't money I had lying around, but she was so passionate, and I wanted to support that fire. 2 weeks went by in a blur. The project transformed from sketches into a working model that actually adjusted climate conditions. Rena tested it nightly, adjusted humidity levels, logged growth patterns. The other kids? They came by twice. Once to drop off a printed chart. The second time, they brought snacks and played on their phones while Rena wired the LED grow lights. The week of the fair, Rena's mood changed. She was quieter. Less enthusiastic. I thought maybe the stress had caught up to her. Then she told me, flatly, in the car one afternoon, they decided I won't be part of the presentation. Just them. I almost slammed on the brakes. She said, they think I might get nervous and mess up. They want to win. I didn't yell. I didn't storm into the school. Rena begged me not to. Please, don't make a scene. I just want it to be over. I nodded, but my heart was twisting in knots. The injustice of it all, the time she put in, the fact that she built the damn thing with her bare hands, and now she was being pushed aside? It made my skin crawl. So I went with her to the science fair. I sat in the front row of the gymnasium, surrounded by eager parents and teachers, and watched as 3 kids I barely recognized stood in front of my daughter's project and smiled like they'd invented sliced bread. They parroted facts they barely understood, pointed at slides they hadn't created. Rena sat behind me, her head down. Then a judge, a tall, older man with an authoritative voice and a badge clipped to his UC Davis blazer, asked the question that changed everything: who actually constructed the model? The 3 kids froze. There was a beat of silence. Then Mira cleared her throat and said, "Well, we all contributed, but Dylan and I did most of the physical assembly." The judge looked unconvinced. He scanned the audience. Then asked, "Is the person who physically assembled and programmed this here?" Rena looked at me, panicked. I gave her the smallest nod. She stood. The judge waved her forward, and I watched as my daughter, hands trembling slightly, walked past her classmates and stood beside the project she'd built from the ground up. And then she began to talk. Her voice was soft, but steady. She explained every detail, how she'd sourced materials, programmed the sensors, tested water levels, calibrated temperatures, ensured the plants adapted. The other judges began jotting down notes. By the end, the UC Davis man was leaning forward, clearly impressed. Mira, Dylan, and Sophia stood off to the side, eyes darting everywhere but at the project. I felt like something had shifted in the room, like everyone realized what had really happened. That was just the beginning. After Rena finished her explanation, there was a hush. The kind that hangs in the air when everyone's pretending not to look at the elephant in the room. The judges murmured quietly among themselves while Mira and the others stood stiffly beside the trifold board that now felt more like a monument to their deceit than a science project. I didn't say anything. I just watched as Rena slowly walked back to her seat, her cheeks pink but her eyes brighter than I'd seen in weeks. The next day, I expected fallout, some reaction from the school, an awkward call from one of the other parents, maybe even Rena coming home upset about social tension. But none of that happened. Instead, we both waited. Quietly. 2 days later, I got a call from the school. They asked me to come in for a meeting with the principal and the science department head. Rena was already at school when I arrived, so it was just me, sitting in a room with 2 educators who looked more uncomfortable than angry. "We'd like to acknowledge something," the principal began, clearing his throat. "We believe there may have been a misrepresentation of group effort during the science fair." I nodded, careful not to seem too reactive. They explained that the judges had contacted the school privately. They weren't just impressed by Rena's knowledge and ability, they were concerned by the lack of transparency in how the group members presented the project. They'd reviewed the footage. Yes, the school records all major presentations for academic accountability, and it was painfully obvious who had done the actual work. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. One of the judges, the man from UC Davis, had offered to sponsor Rena for an advanced mentorship program over the summer, something designed for high school sophomores and juniors, not middle schoolers. "She'll be the youngest participant in the program if she accepts," the science teacher said. "It's rare, but not unheard of. And she earned it." I didn't cry then. But I came close. The school made their decision about the award a week later. They called it a reassignment of recognition. Rena would be credited individually for the project and receive the award funds herself, with the others formally disqualified for failing to disclose true participation. That, of course, opened the floodgates. Myra's mother emailed every PTA member she could find. Dylan's dad wrote a 5-paragraph letter to the superintendent about favoritism and social bias. Sophia's parents tried to claim Rena had pressured the group into silence, then dramatically thrown them under the bus when she got nervous. But the evidence was there: emails, text chains, progress reports, photos of Rena working alone while the others sat on their phones. None of it stuck. And Rena? She stayed mostly quiet through all of it. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak badly about the other kids. She just got up each morning, packed her books, and went to school. Of course, it wasn't easy socially. Kids talk. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Mira and her crew stopped talking to her entirely, which might have hurt more if they'd ever really been friends to begin with. One day I asked her, "Do you regret how it all played out?" She looked at me, her fork poking at a piece of broccoli, and said, "Not really. I didn't plan it like this. But I didn't lie. And I'm tired of pretending I don't know what I'm doing." That's the thing that hit me the hardest. Because for years I'd watched her work twice as hard to get half the credit. I'd seen how being quiet made people think she wasn't capable, how her love of science and books made her weird in the eyes of other kids. I'd encouraged her to stay humble, to be kind, to keep her head down. But now I realized that humility without boundaries turns into invisibility. And I had let that happen, without even meaning to. There were more consequences than I expected, though. The school began quietly reviewing other group projects. They never said so officially, but I heard murmurs among the teachers. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Myra's group had taken more credit than they'd earned. Just the first time they'd been caught. More parents started coming forward, especially those with quieter kids who'd been similarly overshadowed. It sparked a whole conversation at the school about group project ethics, about how participation is measured, and who actually gets recognized. Some families sided with the popular kids, calling it an overreaction. Others thanked me privately in the pickup line, saying, "Good for you guys," or "My son went through the same thing." Rena, for her part, didn't dwell on it. Instead, she buried herself in prep work for the mentorship program. She set up a little corner in our dining room, whiteboard, laptop, trays of circuits and sensors. Her idea of a good weekend now was working on mock experiments or emailing back and forth with her assigned mentor, a woman named Dr. Yoon, who specialized in environmental engineering. I'd never seen her so focused. And yet, as much as this situation opened doors, it also forced her to grow up faster than I wanted. There were tears some nights. There was anger. There was a long conversation about how sometimes people will try to erase you, not because you're wrong, but because your success threatens their version of themselves. We talked about that a lot. We also talked about what it means to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it means losing people you thought were friends. But the truth is, Rena never really lost anything. She just stopped dimming herself to fit in. And that changed everything. The school year marched on, as it always does, but the way Rena walked through the hallways had changed. Not drastically. She didn't suddenly become popular, didn't start wearing trendier clothes or speaking louder. But there was a new steadiness in her step. A quiet kind of dignity that hadn't been there before. I noticed small things. She stopped apologizing so much, especially for things she didn't need to apologize for. She asked for space when she needed it. She corrected people when they assumed something about her, even if it made the room a little tense. Her science teacher started giving her extra assignments, not as punishment, but as opportunity. If she's going to be working with university mentors, he told me, she might as well be challenged at the level she's capable of. I wasn't sure if Rena would keep doing group projects after what happened, but to my surprise, she did. The next one was a social science project, and she was grouped with two girls she barely knew, quiet kids, like her. This time, she set expectations from the beginning. "I'll build the survey system," she told them during their first meeting. "But I expect us to divide the data analysis evenly." They did. And it went fine. The three of them earned second place, and when they presented, all three spoke in turn. No one tried to outshine anyone else. No one faded into the background. It wasn't dramatic. It was just healthy. Collaborative. The way school is supposed to work. Meanwhile, the drama from the first project hadn't entirely died down. Myra's mother filed an official complaint against the school, insisting that the judges had coached Rena and that favoritism had ruined her daughter's academic record. When that didn't stick, she tried pulling her out of the school, threatening to transfer her to a private academy. But then word got around that her daughter had been involved in similar situations in elementary school, always part of a group, always taking the spotlight, always finding ways to discredit others. One teacher remembered a project where Mira had turned in a full essay lifted from an obscure blog, presenting it as her own. None of that had ever been formally documented. But it built a pattern. And even if the school couldn't prove everything, they stopped responding to her mother's emails quite so quickly. Dylan and Sophia seemed to disappear from the drama. Their parents stopped showing up at meetings. I suspect they were more embarrassed than anything else. And Rena? She just kept moving forward. The mentorship program began in early summer. Twice a week, we'd drive to UC Davis. I'd sit in the library or in my car while she attended workshops, seminars, and lab visits with a small group of high schoolers. At first, I was nervous. She was so young compared to the others. But she held her own. I remember picking her up one afternoon and seeing her standing outside the lab with a group of older teens. They weren't teasing her or ignoring her, they were listening. She was showing one of them how to recalibrate a moisture sensor they'd been struggling with. That car ride home, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't feel smaller anymore." I didn't say anything. I just reached over and squeezed her hand. But the summer wasn't all smooth. There was one weekend when Rena came home from the lab looking crushed. She'd submitted a research summary to her mentor and gotten blunt feedback in return. She said I didn't go deep enough, Rena said, sitting at the kitchen table, clutching the printout. That I was too focused on what I already knew. I waited. And she's right, she added. I've been scared to guess. I only write down what I can prove. It was the first time I saw her doubt herself since the science fair. And honestly, it broke my heart a little. But that night, she stayed up past midnight revising the paper. She scrapped the whole second half and rewrote it based on a theory she wasn't sure was right, but she backed it up with data she'd collected on her own time, from her own experiments. She turned it in the next day. The mentor's response came a week later. A short email. Excellent progress. You're learning to think like a scientist. It wasn't flowery. But Rena printed it out and taped it inside her binder. She still has it there. By the end of the mentorship, she was invited to speak on a student panel during their closing symposium. Nothing huge, just a 10-minute Q&A session, but she agreed. I sat in the back of the lecture hall with the other parents, watching her answer questions from strangers with confidence. No script. No hand-holding. Just Rena, being Rena. She never mentioned Mira again. Or Dylan. Or Sophia. It was like she'd outgrown that chapter completely. But for me, it stayed. The whole experience had changed the way I looked at how kids are treated. How we teach them to advocate for themselves, or don't. How easily a quiet kid can be erased in a group setting, not because they lack ability, but because they don't push for space the way louder personalities do. I started noticing it in other parts of our lives, too. In my job, where the men still talked over women during meetings. In PTA committees, where a few strong voices dominated every conversation. Even in the neighborhood book club, where someone always hijacked the discussion no matter what the actual topic was. It made me think about how much we mistake volume for value. Summer came to a close and Rena's name started showing up in more places than just the school newsletter. The UC Davis mentorship had an alumni bulletin that featured a short write-up on her. A local Sacramento Science Foundation included her in a spotlight on young innovators to watch. Even the city's education board sent her a certificate of recognition. It wasn't splashy or viral. It didn't make headlines or break the internet. But it was real. It was earned. And best of all, it was public. Which made what happened next all the more satisfying. Maple Ridge Middle was nominated to host a regional youth science panel that fall. Normally, high schoolers led the sessions, and middle schoolers just attended. But this time, the organizers wanted something fresh, someone from the mentorship program to present to younger students about innovation and resilience in STEM. Guess who they asked? And guess who the school tried to suggest instead? Yes, they tried to slide Myra's name into the pool. According to one of the teachers, who's always been a little too chatty during school functions, Myra's mom had pulled a few strings, donations to the library fund, promises of future alumni support, you know the type. But the organizers had already reviewed applicants and had a short list. And Rena was at the top of it. She was invited to speak on the main stage, not as a panelist, but as the keynote student presenter. She would open the entire conference. Word spread quickly through the school. The announcement went up on the website. Her name, in bold, on the banner, Keynote by Rina Ortega, Youth Innovator and 2025 UC Davis STEM Scholar. The emails from Myra's mother began almost immediately. First to the school. Then, unbelievably, to the conference organizers. She claimed misrepresentation, suggested there were unresolved disputes about the original science fair, and even hinted that her daughter had co-created the very project being used to promote Rina's accolades. But by then, the documentation was airtight. The judge's statements, the school's reassignment of recognition, and even the photos and time logs, everything had already been submitted and vetted by the event team. And then, just to drive the point home, one of the conference coordinators emailed Myra's mom directly. It was polite, but firm. It said, "We are committed to integrity in science education. We support student voices who demonstrate leadership, innovation, and ethical conduct." Rina Ortega exemplifies those values. Her keynote is confirmed. That email made its way around the staff. And eventually, the PTA. I wasn't proud of how satisfying it felt. But it did feel good. The week of the conference, Rina practiced in our living room with a calm I didn't expect. No stage fright, no second guessing. Just quiet confidence. She stood on stage in front of hundreds of students, educators, and science professionals and delivered a talk that opened with this line: "Sometimes, you have to build something completely on your own just to realize how strong you really are." She didn't name names. She didn't call anyone out. But everyone at our school knew the story. And when she finished, after 10 minutes of walking through her design process, the setbacks, the mentorship, the growth, she got a standing ovation. Afterward, one of the teachers from Maple Ridge came up to me, eyes wide. She just outclassed every high schooler here. The best part? Sitting in the crowd were Mira, Dylan, and Sophia. They'd been brought along with the rest of the school's advanced STEM students. Not as speakers. Not as leaders. Just attendees. They had to sit and listen while Rina spoke. They had to clap. And they had to walk past her afterward while adults lined up to shake her hand. Rina didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She was polite to every single person who stopped her to talk. Including Mira, who muttered a tight-lipped "good job" before disappearing down the hallway. That was the revenge. Not cruelty. Not humiliation. Just truth, delivered calmly, in front of the same people who had once erased her. By the end of the day, several regional STEM mentors had handed Rina their cards. One from Stanford. Another from a clean energy startup in the Bay Area. One of them said, "Let me know when you're ready for an internship." She kept every one of those cards in a box under her bed. We drove home in silence that night, both of us exhausted. She stared out the window for a long time. Then said quietly, "I'm glad I didn't quit." Me too. Because this wasn't just about a science project. It was about voice. About recognition. About how standing up for yourself doesn't have to be loud or angry to be powerful. And how, sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear.